Political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, joins me now to unpack these issues. Professor, good afternoon. Appreciate your time today. What are the main factors that have led to the deadlock between the ANC and DA in Gauteng? Now, just listening to that analyst previously, he seems to suggest that there's issues from way back, in fact, that have resulted in this deadlock. Legacy issues, if you will.
Well, that might be the case. I'm not absolutely, I don't have concrete evidence about it, but I think for insiders, it might be able to explain it that way. But I think what we are seeing, well, maybe then the manifestation of those issues are at the moment very specifically about the allocation of the 10 seats on the Executive Council. And I specifically emphasize that it is 10 seats compared to the 30 cabinet seats and 45 deputy ministers. So it's a completely different ballgame. And you cannot really compare the national with the provincial situation in this respect. There are, for example, no deputies at provincial level. It is only the 10 members and that's it. And so it is a very small number that must be allocated amongst quite a number of parties. We know this is going to be also a larger than necessary coalition that they want to form, a provincial unity government. So it means that it can be, if one looks at the national, the government of national unity, and those parties and bring them back to Gauteng, then it might be 7 parties that should be involved in it. Now, 10 seats for 7 parties, that's a very tough question or tough task in order to allocate. What we've heard is that, and I don't know if it's confirmed, but that the ANC was saying they want to take 7 or 8 of the 10, the DA 2, and then the remaining seat for one other party. Now, that is clearly completely disproportional to the results, where the ANC received 34, almost 35%, and the DA just 7% less, in 27%. So they are very close to each other, much closer than at national level. So that must be to some extent being reflected also in the allocation of the 10 seats.
Well, it raises the issue of the formula. I mean, if we look at the grand scheme of things in the government of national unity, there was a formula of sorts that can be traced back. What sort of formula would Panyaza Lesufi, as a premier, be expected to use to obviously get all sides at the table somewhat satisfied?
Well, I think it should be relatively similar to that of the national allocation. The national allocation is not strictly proportional. And that was, in the beginning, one of the sticking points between the ANC and the DA. But it resembled, to some extent, the representation or the in Parliament or the votes received by the different parties. So given the fact that we are there is an element of comparison between the national and the provincial governments, therefore I think something similar should be done. A party that didn't receive the majority of votes cannot have the majority of seats in the executive. I think that's the plain principle.
Now, what do you think the discussions or deliberations have been so contentious? Is it purely because of this disproportionate ratio, as we might assume it is, where the ANC would like to give the DA only just 2 of those MEC positions, or is there more to it?
Well, I think this is the symptom that we are seeing of maybe some deeper issues. Within the province of Gauteng, there has been some really, I would say, serious standoffs between the ANC and the DA, especially in relation to the metros. For example, in the case of Tshwane, there have been a very serious differences of opinion between the ANC and the DA, and that led to very deep, I would say, contradictions between them. So it will be very difficult for them to come now together and work on almost in a seamless way. It is simply impossible to expect that. But this is exactly what this is expected of them to do, is to come together because of the results of the election. This is a completely new dispensation. I mean, the ANC from just over 50% to 34. It's more than 16% that they have lost. This is not the situation of 2-3 months ago. It's a completely new political landscape, and all the parties will have to adjust to that.
Now, how different is the situation that Gauteng finds itself in relative to all the other provinces in the country? Because Gauteng remains the outstanding province where the executive has not yet been identified, or at the very least made public.
Well, the only other province that stands out is KwaZulu-Natal, and there they were very quick in order to establish a coalition, a provincial coalition, because there the two groups, the two sides, the ANC plus its parties that it can work or have chosen to work with, versus the MK and the EFF, were so close to each other. There was just a 2% or so difference between them. So the party that really made a difference there and became the real kingmaker was the NFP. There's no other province that had a similar situation. The only other province was where the ANC didn't have a 50% plus one anymore is the Northern Cape, and there that was very high in the 40s. So they actually didn't need any other party to support them because they had 15 out of the 30 seats in the provincial legislatures were allocated to them. But the Patriotic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus supported them in the election of the Premier. So that's the only other province. In the Western Cape, the DA is in the majority, and in the other provinces, the ANC are in the majority. So Gauteng is really now the outstanding one, not only in terms of that the executive hasn't been concluded, but it is not similar to KwaZulu-Natal and also not similar to the national situation.
Now, if we draw parallels to the GNU and the considerations that President Cyril Ramaphosa would have taken into account in engagements with the DA and obviously several other parties, there was a letter of intent that was written or signed or agreed to by the various parties. Do we have any similar structures in Gauteng? Does the ANC have any obligations to the DA or to any of the other political parties?
Not what I'm aware of. I think the way in which it is approached, the ANC is not a federalist type of party. So it is very much centralized, and most of the decisions are taken from Lutuli House. So the statement of intent that was signed for the national situation, I would almost say applies across the board. It didn't speak directly to the provincial situations. But the principles that were established there, I think, are almost automatically applicable also to the provincial situation. And what we are seeing, especially now in Gauteng, is that the parties that will most possibly be aligned in a provincial government of unity or unity government will be very similar to those of the national and government of national unity. So there are, in that respect, there are similarities, and I can almost guarantee it can be ultimately reached with the support of Lutuli House and some national leaders, and not purely at the provincial level.
Sorry, Professor, you almost guaranteed something, and then we lost you for a moment. Just repeat that statement again, please.
Okay, what I'm saying is that I think it's almost inevitable that ultimately the agreement that will be reached by the Gauteng parties will be facilitated or will be assisted by the national leadership, possibly on both sides.
And finally, what does the deadlock say about the leadership styles of Panyaza Lesufi and Solly Msimanga?
Well, it looks to me that they haven't been really directly involved so far. That is one of the steps that can be followed in order that, because it looks like it's mainly the negotiating committees or teams that are at the moment involved in these talks. But that one way of resolving it is to elevate it to the level of the provincial leaders That means Pangyasa Lesotho and Solly Msimanga. And if they cannot reach an agreement, then go to the national level.
Professor Dirk Kotze, appreciate your time. Thank you for unpacking those issues for us around the Gauteng legislature. Now, coming up next.